Hi, I'm Dr. Mindy Maycant. I'm Professor of Religious Studies at Lenore University, where I'm also the Director of the Living Well Center for Vocation and Purpose. One of the things that the Living Well Center does is a series called Lives Worth Living, in which we invite a variety of people to think out loud with us about what it looks like or what it means to live a life worth living. And I have with me today a friend, Leila Ortiz, Pastor Leila Ortiz, who is a pastor and theologian in the ELCA. She serves as the bishop of the Metro DC Synod. She's the first Latina bishop in the ELCA outside of Puerto Rico. And Leila, it is an absolute honor to have you with me today. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
So I'm just going to start by asking you, when you think about what does it look like to live a life worth living for you, what does that mean?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is that I need to pay attention to my story and how it brings me to where I am. And it has many, many phases and dualities and forms of particular identity that then informs how I live and what makes my life worth living. And so I'd like to begin by sharing that I happen to be born in Puerto Rico and then moved to New York when I was 2 years old. They moved me back when I was 13, and then I came back when I was 21. And so, once I left Puerto Rico back to New York and the States, and a dynamic became prevalent in my life, and that was that I am not Latina enough to be American or to be Puerto Rican, right? I'm not Puerto Rican the way Puerto Ricans on the island are Puerto Rican. And I'm not American the way Americans are perceived. When you think of an American, you don't see me, right? And so I realized, and in reading Old Testament scholar Fernando Segovia, he talks about being from two places and having no place in which to stand. And that's been me. And so that's been my experience. And so what happens as a result is that I've learned how to navigate both spaces in ways that are unique in each context, right? But it also, there's a struggle. There's a struggle there for me. When I'm here, I have to name who I am, from Puerto Rico, from the Bronx, right? Raised Pentecostal, now Lutheran, which is another duality, and the same experience. I was raised in the Pentecostal church all of my life until I was 27. And so I have a foundation, and I'm rooted in a spirituality that is connected to the Pentecostal tradition, which is more conservative, but also a lot more intimate in relationship with God, the Spirit, and Jesus, right? And so I bring that into my Lutheran experience, which is a lot more theological, head-wise. We think, we process, we create, we theorize, right? And so I get to connect the theory, the philosophy, the theology of what it is that we believe with the heart of the experience that comes from the Pentecostal church, right? So I have the Puerto Rican, American, Lutheran, Pentecostal, and so I claim to be a New Eurekan Luther-Costal, right? It's all of the above. And so I have to be mindful of that so that I am careful not to check any of who I am at the door in any space that I enter, right? And that takes work because I have to be someone who likes to be liked, right? Like most of us. And so that means that even though I'm able to navigate spaces, I deny myself and I deny others the fullness of who I am and the gifts that I bring if I check any part of that at the door in any particular time or space. And so I will now be 42 this year. And so it's taken 42, maybe 20 years of young adulthood and theological education and lived experience to become comfortable in the fullness of who I am, right? There was a season where I wanted to reject or deny my Pentecostal upbringing when I was in Lutheran spaces because people were so convinced that It was a sad experience. Oh, too bad. I'm so sorry that you engaged in the Pentecostal church. And I let that happen until I realized that my intimacy, my discipleship with Jesus is completely other and life-giving because of that experience, because of my experience in the Pentecostal church. And so then finally I was able to claim, this is who I am. I don't need to deny it to make you more comfortable, right? Or to make you feel like you're saving me in some way because you've introduced me to Lutheran theology. That for me truly is liberation theology from my personal experience. So it's taken time. It's taken time, and it continues to be a journey to pay attention to when I enter spaces, what my inclination or what my instinct is to kind of accommodate the space, and resist that desire to accommodate and enter into the space as who I am and as who God has called me to be, which is many layers, right? Leila Ortiz is layered, and it's okay to be layered and to claim all of who I am. So that's a life worth living for me. Walk into space and be confident in who God has created, confident in the experience that have formed the totality of who I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? All of it. Especially as a Lutheran who believes and understands what it means to be a saint and a sinner, to live in that tension and not to lean on one or the other, but to claim that we live in both ends. Just as I am Puerto Rican from the island, just as I'm a New Yorker from the Bronx, just as I'm Pentecostal from the Bronx and Lutheran from Philly, right? All of that matters, and all of that speaks to how I see the world, my worldview, and my contributions to it. And I think that that's a life worth living, just living in the fullness of who you are and who God has created.
You have always seemed to me to be a person who is full of both graciousness, but also of joy. And when you said that about being from two places, but with no place to stand, it just, that strikes me as my experience of you as a person who seems to not only possess joy, but to share it, to give out joy in the world. And that almost seems contradictory to me, to be someone without a place to stand and yet to be someone full of joy. And so I wonder where you find joy, where does that come from? Where is your source of joy in the midst of all of this?
Yeah, well, I think the statement, Segovia's statement, is incomplete in that his perspective and his argument is geographical, right? You come from two different places, but you have no place in which to stand because you're either not accepted or not fully what is expected in that space. But as Christians, as believers, my place in which to stand is in my relationship with Jesus, right? In my identity as a follower of Christ, claimed by in my baptism, right? So that's my source. That's my home, right? And so because I have that relationship, I can navigate the space and not be oppressed by the process, right? Which is work because I can be, and it can be exhausting, and it is exhausting, right? Because I'm consistently commuting, right? I'm commuting from one space to another, recognizing and learning the context that I'm in, and helping that space understand or acknowledge that I'm not like all the rest. I'm not like you. You're not like me, and yet we can be together in the same space. Right? So it's consistent work. Were it not that I had my faith on which to stand, I don't know that the story would be the same, right? Because, for instance, when I'm in Pentecostal settings, I'm speaking to the Lutheran experience of grace, right? When I'm in Lutheran settings, I'm speaking and teaching about the discipleship and intimacy and prayer, right? And the move of the Holy Spirit, right? And so I feel like I'm consistently teaching. And I think that's another place where I experience joy. I love teaching, and I love having aha moments with those that I'm engaging with, right? Not that I provide them, but that together we're learning, we're gleaning, we're growing, right? And so, yeah, my joy comes from my faith and from the opportunities to share that things are not as cut and dry or clean. Things are complicated and messy, and I find joy in that. That doesn't scare me, right? Many people in our context like things to be clean, like things to be ordered, and life isn't that way. So I get to say it's okay. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to be complicated. God is in all of it, and we do learn from all of it. So yeah.
It sounds like you understand a lot of your role then to be translating. I mean, it seems to me like it's the literal translation of English to Spanish, but that there is a translation between your Pentecostal world and your Lutheran world, and between your Puerto Rican, again, not just linguistically, but your cultural worlds. That's an active translation that you're always commuting and always translating, and yeah, that must be exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be exhausting, but then there are, pockets of revelation, and it's all worth it, right? You kind of wake up to a new way of thinking and being, and the commute and the work becomes a blessing, right? It becomes transformative or a source of liberation and transformation. And thanks be to God. Those are the moments that I crave for on a daily basis.
So that actually suggests an answer to the next question that I was going to ask, which is, what do you find most fulfilling in all that you do? Where is your greatest fulfillment?
Yeah. Like I've just shared, I seek the learning moment for the sake of transformation and liberation. I don't seek it just to acquire knowledge or just to have or to grow my archive of information. I think that's pointless and it doesn't matter, right? I can be brilliant, but if I don't put it into action and actually grow, evolve, accommodate the need of the time, then I'm doing work in vain, right? For me, what I find exhilarating is when the theory and the experience actually impacts the world in ways that provide newness, right? Provide healing, restoration, reformation, right? And so that's the work that I feel called to. I don't feel called to be an ivory tower theologian that only provides theory or philosophy, although theology, I don't know that there's a way that can happen, right? If we're engaging in theology, it's practical. But there is a concept or idea that if we're academics, then we're just doing this head work, right? Hopefully the head work translates into our hands and feet in the world. But I don't feel called to teaching for the sake of teaching, I should say, right? I think most of us share that. I feel called to teaching and translating and working and walking with for the sake of the need that's in the moment. And of course, right now, there are so many needs. And just so sometimes talking, sharing, and going back and forth and kind of developing your thoughts is exactly what we need. And then there's a moment where those words and those learnings, right, need to take action, hands and feet. So that's what I'm praying for, and that's what I'm working towards with the help of God and the Holy Spirit. Clearly, we can't do this alone, right? We've all been called in particular ways with particular gifts, and then the Spirit does the rest. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. But I intend to be present for when the Spirit moves so that I may be used for the sake of the world.
Thank you. What advice might you offer to young adults who, I mean, as you just said, there's a lot of need in the world right now. This is probably the trickiest time that I can remember in my life, in my lifetime. What advice would you give to undergraduate students, 18, 22, 25-year-olds right now who are starting to address their own sense of vocation and call, but they're doing so in a very fraught environment right now?
Yeah. I would advise several things. Number one, I would shy away from any assumption that we know anything about anything, right? And once we shy away from the assumption, then be intentional in our listening, especially listening to people who have lived experiences other than your own, right? Don't assume you know who I am because I said I'm from New York. Don't assume you know who I am because I happen to be Latina, right? Don't assume you know who I am because I'm a Republican or a Democrat, right? Don't assume anything about anyone. Take the time to push that aside, look at the human being, engage the human being, and listen. And once you listen, then learn. Take some notes, right? Maybe you've heard some things that you haven't heard before. Take some notes and think about that a little bit, so that you learn something that then you can use as you lead, right? As a bishop, I've been engaging my synod, the people, the congregations that I've been entrusted to serve, that this in particular is a time to listen, to learn, so that we may lead. This is not just for, satisfaction's sake. This is a challenging time so that we may lead in a way that is complicit toward liberation and transformation. And so, yeah, put assumptions aside about who people are, put the labels aside, put the stories aside that have been told and constructed for you, right? About how to perceive the other. Put those aside, look at the human, listen to the human, learn from them, and then lead in the body that God has called you into, right? Not only in the physical body, but in the community that you serve. And lead faithfully and lead prophetically and boldly, right? For the sake of sanity, for the sake of healing, for the sake of restoration, for the sake of a world that is in absolute and desperate need of love that transforms, right? I think this is what we're lacking. I don't know that we know how to love. We don't know how to love ourselves. We don't know how to love the other. We don't know that we are loved, right? And so from that place of hurt and pain, we hurt and cause pain to others. So yeah, assumptions aside, listen, learn, and lead.
Muchas gracias, Obispa. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.